everyone, welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. Today I'm using this cling stamp set from Cosmo Cricket called Summer Love. I'm also using the Summer Love 8x8 pad, and it has some really fun colors. Some of them almost feel a little bit pastel, but it's still very summer-esque and kind of springy, and the ice cream cones on that stamp set are hilarious. So I really wanted to stamp and color these. So in order to have the ice cream cones cut out and kind of popped off the card, I needed somewhere for the arms and legs to go. So I decided I would go ahead and stamp the arms and legs on this sort of circle piece, kind of a portion off circle piece, and StazOn ink. And then when I color the ice cream cones, I can pop them off that circle and the arms and legs would be underneath on that cream pattern paper. This is paper from that 8x8 pad, so I know it's going to match perfectly with the other kind of tones of the card. So I have some watercolor paper here. This is Simon Says Stamp watercolor paper, and I'm stamping the ice cream cones in StazOn ink because I'm going to be using some distress markers and a watercolor brush. So what I'm basically doing here is I'm using two different colors, Antique Linen and Wild Honey, and for each area that I'm coloring, I'm first going to put down the lighter color of the two around the outer edges of that area, and then I'll get a little bit of water on a brush and add that moisture down and sort of bring that color in from the edges of the area. And once that was done, I took the darker color and kind of put that down around the edges so that it added a little bit of shading and gives it a little bit more of a color tone, because that lighter color was just a little too dark. So I brought in Wild Honey and I wicked that in from the edges using my brush, and that really gives it a nice yellow tone for the cone. And I did this because I didn't want the entire ice cream cone to be yellow, so by only putting it around the outside edges, it ensures that the center area is still quite bright and light, and it gives the illusion of maybe a center light coming down straight onto that ice cream cone. I'm doing the same thing with the other ice cream cone, and you'll notice here that I actually stamped the cones twice because the first time they didn't stamp all the way. That's because it's on watercolor paper and it's textured paper, and so just that stamped image didn't work quite well enough, but that's okay because I needed that extra watercolor paper to test out colors of the markers. So that watercolor paper that I stamped on didn't go to waste. I did use that to sample colors, and you'll see as we go along here that I did that quite a bit. I tested out a lot of colors. Some of the distress markers, the colors don't look exactly like the ink pad colors. So even if you are familiar with the distress ink pads and the re-inkers, you might want to kind of test out your markers just to be sure that it's the right color. So I'm using these two colors for pink, Worn Lipstick and Spun Sugar. I picked these colors out and tested them so that they would match that pattern paper that you can see off to the left side of the screen. And that's another reason why I wanted to test out these colors, because I really wanted them to play off the warmer tones in the pattern paper. I wanted everything to go together really well. So I'm taking the lighter color and I'm kind of mapping out the area where I want the most dark areas to be. And you're going to see here when I bring in my water on my watercolor brush that it doesn't really blend out too much. Some of the distress markers blend out better than others, but this one kind of really didn't when you put it directly on the paper and then add water later. But when I went in and added Worn Lipstick, which is the darker of the pinks, that one really wicked away from the edges really well and gave really good shading. So I just went over the areas again to add a little bit of a darker tone. And I added some water to that as well. And you'll see that it really starts to blend out more from there. Even some of those kind of brush strokes that you could see, they start to diminish and it looks a little bit more smooth and shaded out. Worked out really, really well. I ended up bringing in more of the marker because I wanted a little bit darker on that one side. So I just added a little bit more and then added more water and blended that out. Then I went back to the other ice cream cone, and I'm using Vintage Photo and Wild Honey. And I'm going to start with Wild Honey and just put a little dot of color on each of these little peanuts. I'm assuming this is kind of like those drumstick ice cream cones where it's chocolate and then they dip it in nuts. So you've got the lighter color nuts on top of the darker chocolate. So I watercolored the distress ink or the distress marker first in Wild Honey and kind of got that lighter tone all the way down over the top of that cone. And then I brought in Vintage Photo and I started on one side. The left side's going to be more in shadow, so I wanted to add it over there first. So I just brought it in about halfway across the ice cream cone and then took my watercolor brush and started to blend that in and wick away from that edge that I left. And it's going to help blend in with that lighter Wild Honey color as I blend it out. So I'm just blending that over. And I went over all of the areas that I'd added with the Vintage Photo just to add a little bit more smoothness to it. And then I decided I wanted to add even a little bit more shadow on that left side. So I brought the marker back and added more over there. And I don't think I really even blend out that side. I just decided that it started to blend kind of on its own because the paper was wet. So it started to kind of blend on its own. So I just worked in that area a little bit more. And then I brought in more shading on the far edge because I wanted it to have a look of that it was a sphere. I wanted it to look more circular and in shape. So adding a little bit of shadow on that one side achieves that look. For the ice cream on that, I used scattered straw. Just brought that in underneath where that chocolate area is. Just a little tiny bit so it looks like vanilla ice cream. And then brought in my watercolor brush just to get that color moving and blending away from the edges where I colored. Now, I mentioned earlier I had that issue with the stamp on the watercolor paper, and so some of the solid black areas didn't quite fill in, so I went in with a black marker and just filled in those black areas. As far as the card base goes, I'm using some craft cardstock. This is Nina Desert Storm, and I started out making a standard size A2 card. You'll see me cut it down to be a square in a minute here, but I decided while I was waiting for all of that watercoloring to dry, I would make my card base. And once it was dry, I went in with some Distress Stickles in Rock Candy. I love this Rock Candy Stickles because when it dries, it just looks like sugar stuck to your paper. It's really cool. You'll see an up-close image of that in a minute here. And while the Distress Stickles were drying, I brought in the pattern paper. I used a couple different patterns from that pattern paper pack. Put the stripes at the bottom, put the half circle right on that top edge over the top of the yellow and pink pattern. I also stamped the little Hi There talk bubble from the stamp set and trimmed that out using my Tim Holtz scissors. And then I decided to cut out the ice cream cones. And you're going to notice I cut off the legs and I cut off the arms too. And that's because I stamped those on the cream cardstock. In order to make it look like I cut these out perfectly, I took a black brush tip marker and kind of just touched the edges around the shape here. And that's going to make it look like I got into all those little tiny nooks and crannies on that image. Use some foam adhesive to adhere that over the top of the stamped area. And if you want to get really precise with this, you can actually color in that under area. I would have colored in the ice cream cones to be black so that when you kind of look at the card from the side, you wouldn't see that whole stamped area underneath, but it turned out to be okay. So I cut out the other ice cream cone, trimmed that out and adhered that as well. And then I decided that the card would look better square since everything was kind of near the bottom. So I cut it down and made a new card base. The card is now 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. Then I brought in another piece of pattern paper from that 8x8 pad. And I'm just using the darkest pink color at the very bottom. I used the Fiskars Scallop Sentiment Punch just to give myself a little scallop edge that I could put underneath the ice cream cone area and extend to the sides of the card. And then I used 2 little foam squares. I cut a foam square down so that they would fit on top of this little talk bubble. And I put 2 layers of foam so that it would stand above the ice cream cones. Adhered that down. And then I took a white gel pen and added dashed lines along those edges. And almost done here, but I'm going to go ahead and punch the bottom corners with my We Are Memory Keepers corner chomper. I'm using the 1/2 inch corner rounder on this part. And that finishes the card for today. I'm going to show you up close what that Distress Stickles looks like. This looks like little sugar crystals stuck to your project. It's really cool. Hope you guys enjoyed today's card, and I will catch you guys next time.